Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter.
Folks, and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. I'm Sri, apparently the cleanup hitter CPG guy, and like to discuss branding, direct-to-consumer, omni-channel retail, P&Ls, connected commerce, retail media, and marketplaces. And my friend and co-host I'm joined by is the utility infielder, an expert at digital shelf content, retail success, customer data, insights, CRM, and loyalty, and often also fancifully known as the man who actually created the 6-foot CVS register receipt that I still pick up when I buy anything at CVS. And recently he's walking around calling himself the social media maven of TikTok and Clubhouse. Really, Peter? Join me in welcoming the man with the golden voice, lovingly known as Mr. 007. Hello, Mr. Peter Bond. How are you today?
Sri, it's always a pleasure spending time with you during this podcast. We investigate some really interesting things today. We're covering yet another interesting component of something that's become really highlighted during this pandemic, of all these people eating at home and no longer being able to go and dine out while that is subsiding. A lot of people developed some incredible culinary skills during this pandemic, and we're going to talk about a company that has helped facilitate that so that people can make really inspiring meals at home.
You're right, Peter. And having been in the food and beverage industry forever, 10 plus years at my alma mater, PepsiCo, I've always wondered how fast on planet Earth we would see recipe shopping. But before we get to our guest and we get into any of that, I want to remind our audience that you curate the show, and therefore all our content on our series. You asked us for profitability, including a pro forma P&L, our Women's Leadership series back in fall 2020, where Peter and I were able to donate $8,000 to the Susan G. Komen Fund, and our ongoing Founders series in the first half of 2021 can be found easily. All you got to do, cpgguys.com. And Peter, is the content free? Yes, it is. Wait, there's even a Fresh For on Instagram on Sunday evenings at 8 p.m. where Peter and I recap what's up for the next week, 4 hot topics in the CPG industry. Also, our show's content is driven by you. The best way you can continue to do that and tell us who you'd like to see and what content you'd like to see, simply go to linkedin.com. All you got to do is in the search bar is type CPG Guys, and there's a little plus sign that says follow. It's not that hard. You can give it a shot. Or simply go to ratethispodcast.com/CPG Guys and leave us a rating and a review. The ratings and review guy himself loves a number, and if you're on video, he's showing number 5. I wonder why. But we really appreciate your direction, folks, and thank you so much. In the recent past, we've had 5 polls. You've engaged in them. You are helping shape our content, as I said before. But our topic today is, with a company on a mission to do digital grocery marketing significantly better than the experiences available today. As more consumers buy groceries online, which obviously in the last 15 months has taken on a different dimension, brands and retailers need new and innovative ways to engage with shoppers digitally. The contextual commerce approach to shopper marketing extends your brand's reach amongst ready-to-buy consumers outside of the retail network. Reaching grocery shoppers online has never been simpler or more doable or scalable. Chicory's network spans 1,500 plus recipes, websites, 5.4 whopping million recipes, and reaches 100 million shoppers a month. Crazy numbers, folks. We're launching a 3-part series in partnership, therefore, with the team at Chicory. And today we'll be speaking about how Chicory was founded and what white space that it actually filled, its role in the grocery industry, and their thoughts on everything from my favorite topic, retail media networks. Privacy of data, which obviously in the last few weeks has taken on a different meaning since the Apple release of version 14 plus, the dreaded word, third-party cookies, post-COVID changes, and a lot more. And therefore, our guests for this first part of the series are the co-founders of Chicory, also Forbes 30 Under 30 honorees. Please join us, folks, in welcoming Yuni Sameshima and Joey Petracca. Folks, welcome. How are you both today?
Doing great. Peter, Sri, thanks for having us. We are avid listeners of the CPG guys, and it's honestly a little crazy to be on the podcast yourself. So thanks for having us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to host you both and hopefully get into one of my favorite topics, which is actually recipes. But before we get to the questions as the CEO, would you please, Yuni, give our audience a quick summary of Chicory's business, including how our multitasking audience can quickly find you on the web?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chicory is holistically, we're a digital shopper marketing platform. We work with CPGs and retailers to reach and engage with grocery shoppers using contextual commerce. So we have, like you said, over 1,500 recipe sites where we partner with, and we turn their recipes into a retail environment. So we're able to serve contextual ads on relevant recipe content, as well as make recipes shoppable. You can learn more about Chicory at www.chicory.co. So .co.
Thank you so much for that. But we have a rule here on the CPG guys, Yuni. When we use a word, because our audience varies, multi-cross-functional executives from brands and retailers, that could include folks from supply chain, finance, etc. When we use the word contextual, you get 60 seconds to decompose it for our audience. What is the word contextual in relation to today?
Yeah, contextual in the world in relation to today is all about recipe content. So where are grocery shoppers shopping outside of, call it, in-store or even on the retailer's website? So for us, that's making recipes the right context to reach those shoppers.
Thank you so much for that simple explanation. So let's jump right into it and get into the questions. So Yuni, I'll start with you first. What prompted Joey and you to co-found this model? What was the white space that you saw? And how fast has this been growing to date? I'm not looking for numbers. I'm looking for what's the scale?
Yeah, no, good question. So, I'll give you a little history. So, Joey and I we started this business 8 years ago. We were really good friends in college. We actually started Chicory our senior year in undergrad, where we started up at Colgate University, which is in upstate New York. But we were actually in the same a cappella group. We were really, really good friends, and we said, hey, let's start a business together. And so fall of senior year, we got together. We said, we both like to cook. We come from families where the family dinner is super important. And we said, okay, how do people, shop for recipes today, right? They go onto recipe sites, which turns out huge traffic, huge audience. They write down a list of ingredients. They go to the grocery store, and they buy the ingredients to the recipe. And growing up, right outside of New York City, we've had Peapod, we've had Fresh Direct for a pretty long time. And so honestly, being students, we did a lot of research. We said, wow, recipe sites are huge. But online grocery, it was being called the final frontier of e-commerce. And we saw this huge growth. And we said, if people are looking at recipes online, buying the ingredients in store, but that store is moving online, why not connect online recipes with online retailers? And that's how Chicory was born. We were born as a very B2C product where we said, hey, let's partner with recipe sites, place a little button that says get ingredients. Consumers can click on it. We pop up a list of retailers that they can choose. So today we partner with retailers like Kroger, Amazon, Walmart, etc. And consumers can basically add all the ingredients they need to their basket. So that's how the model first started, was very consumer facing. Over time, people say startups pivot all the time. You're learning constantly. A couple of years into it, we realized that the big opportunity here was recipes, right? Recipes we made shoppable, but we made shoppable for a very important reason, and that's because people are looking at recipes to make their shopping lists and to buy groceries. So we started talking to a few CPG companies. I remember we were talking to a marketer at Chobani specifically, and we were trying to understand how do CPGs reach consumers, right? And we asked this marketer, hey, how do you reach consumers today? He said, well, we target women between 25 and 45 in these areas. And so, I looked around the room. I looked at Joey, my co-founder, and this guy, and we were like, well, the three of us would buy Greek yogurt. It seems kind of weird almost antiquated that you're not targeting us. So we asked him, why don't you target, people looking at recipes that call for Greek yogurt? Because presumably those people are they might even be, in the store using the recipe on their phone as the list, right, to buy Greek yogurt. So We said, why don't you target people looking at recipes that call for Greek yogurt? He said, that doesn't really exist. And if you can build it, we'd buy it. And so we actually launched our whole advertising business based off of that, a couple conversations similar to that. So, over time, we went from just a shoppable recipe technology company to actually making recipes more of this moment where brands can engage with consumers. And so now we have a whole media arm of our business where we help brands reach consumers looking at recipes that call for their product. Over time, obviously, Amazon has acquired Whole Foods, e-commerce has become a thing. Both sides of our business, kind of e-commerce enablement as well as media, have come together. And Sri, like you were saying before, both retail media more recently, as well as all this privacy stuff that's coming out is really helping bolster our business as well. So we've grown a ton over the past few years specifically. We work with some of the biggest CPGs in the country, partner with some of the biggest retailers, and we're on 40% of the top 10 recipe sites out there, making those recipes into a retail moment. So lots of growth, and we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up ahead as well.
Fascinating, Yuni, but did I hear you say you both were part of an a cappella group? Here on the CPG Guys, we have a rule. When we find someone who sings, question number 2 automatically is sing a song for us. I'm kidding. Over to you, Peter.
Yeah. That's so embarrassing. No way.
Maybe after a couple drinks.
Actually, Sri, what's got my head going is that, this age-old Colgate University is in Hamilton, New York, but Hamilton College is in Clinton, New York. I'm still struggling with that, but let's put that aside. Yuni Joey, it is so great to have you on the podcast. This is a fascinating business that you've built, and it's one that I pay a lot of attention to. I do all the cooking in my family, so recipes are a core component of how I sustain my family. All right, so with that in mind, Joey, I'd like you to try to dimensionalize for us how digital recipes are fitting into the grocery shopper's path to purchase.
The first thing to understand about digital recipes and recipes in general is just how prolific they are in terms of consumer usage. So, there's a lot of studies out there that look at this. We run our own surveys and studies, but around 4 out of 5 consumers say that they use recipe content to eventually purchase products, right? Peter, you said you do it. I do it all the time. I also am the home cook, for my family. And so constantly looking at recipes, even though I do this for a job, every Sunday, every Saturday, I'm looking at recipe content. And what I think is really interesting and what's kind of fundamentally changed, particularly in the last 10 years, is when we say recipe content, what do we really mean, right? Like, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we would be talking about magazines, we were talking about, Food Network, and that was kind of the place where people would go. Obviously, social media has changed all that, and in particular in food and cooking, the biggest thing, and this is kind of what we noticed early on, was the proliferation of food influencers and food bloggers. Right, you can get 10 food influencers in a room together, and they have just as much traffic as some of the biggest publishers in the world. It's kind of just fundamentally changed how consumers experience food content online. If you Google any recipe like chicken parm, odds are at least half of the first 10 things that come up, they're going to be food influencers. So we kind of partnered early on with all of those different content creators to be able to bring our model to them, which again is being able to create those shoppable moments on their content. And so what we find is, other than a retailer website, right, that first Google search, like, easy vegan meal or, how to make chicken parm or something like that. Like, that's where consumers are starting. They're either starting there or they're doing a search, on the retailer website to understand a product and build their shopping list that way. Like, those to us, and the data proves this out, are the two places that consumers are going to kind of build out their lists and eventually, ultimately make a purchase decision. So, kind of our take on this landscape and kind of how we view recipes is, there's so much recipe content out there that our goal is essentially to enable all of it, right? Like, if the majority of people that are experiencing this content probably start with Google or start with, TikTok or start with Pinterest or all these other platforms where they're getting, their inspiration. They're figuring out what they're actually going to make this weekend or, for a barbecue or a potluck or something like that. We want to make as many moments as possible there, easy for them to go from inspiration to commerce, essentially. And that's what, we've been able to do and our kind of focus on the long tail there.
Shri, you know what I heard there? I heard Chicory saying we're agnostic to where the customer starts the journey. We just want to be there. And that means more customers will be satisfied. They'll find the recipe. They'll be able to deliver a meal solution and satisfy their family. That's terrific.
Oh, that's for sure, Peter, that Chicory actually is bringing significant value to the CPG industry by actually enabling this contextual commerce. And for those who want to, again, dig into that word, Yuni gave an explanation of contextual right up front. But I learned something else, Peter. Joey's a good cook, and he's only one $6.75 toll bridge away from me. And that, too, I can cross over for free by going over the 59th Street Bridge, also renamed as Queensboro. So, Joey, watch out.
Anytime.
But coming your way. Yuni, so let's jump a little bit into recipes and the rise in the last 15 months because, clearly there's a lot of on-premise that shifted to at-home and some portion of it is sticky and it's going to stay forever, even though we'll see some sort of a resurgence back in on-premise. So with that rise, Yuni, how can shopper marketers take advantage of the moment and also deliver for the consumer at the same time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think, that question, wraps up a ton of stuff that's happening in the grocery industry in general, right? So just to take a step back, grocery e-commerce getting much bigger. And I think the very surface level analysis is that, hey, a lot of consumers are now buying groceries online. I think the four of us here know that behind the scenes in grocery, there's a lot more that happens right before or prior to a consumer purchasing. And so I'm talking about CPG marketing spend, right? $230 billion a year primarily has been in store. And I think the grocery e-commerce shift actually isn't a shift of just consumers. It's the grocery mindset is shifting from primarily being in-store centric to now shifting to being digital centric. And so when you think about how CPGs want to engage with consumers, it's not just, it's going now, how do we reach consumers low funnel? How do we say we're used to reaching consumers in the store? How do we do that online? And what we're seeing now is the proliferation of retail media, because what more low funnel tactic is there than going to Kroger.com and searching for, reaching a consumer who's on Kroger? That no brainer, low funnel, that's where things shift. But the question becomes then, okay, where else can we reach consumers? Because that's a lot of money that's shifting over to digital. Where else do we reach consumers? And when you think about the digital path to purchase, it's not just about, hey, the consumer's walking into the store, reach them while they're shopping, taking an hour to shop. It's, wow, a much longer now path to purchase to actually getting that consumer to buy. So that's where, when you ask about recipes, that's where recipes come into play. Consumers are starting their grocery shopping journey there. And so we like to call it contextual commerce. Right, layering in this new trend of shoppability and e-commerce enablement into the right context, so contextual commerce. And that's how we believe right now shopper marketers can take advantage of this shift to digital and digital consumer is how do you reach those consumers when they're actually shopping and when it's relevant for them? And for us, that's recipes, right? Recipes are a relevant moment. And so again, a lot to unpack there, but you can do that by doing shoppable ads or contextual advertising. You could do it through shoppable recipes or other venues. Health and beauty, they do YouTubers. So it's not a model that hasn't existed in the past. It's just been difficult for grocery, and recipes are a great piece of content, I think, unique to grocery that facilitates that.
So, Joey, one of the things I love to do on the podcast is right before we go to record, I log onto the script and I like to reorder the questions to steal away some of Shri's favorites. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to steal his favorite topic, which is retail media.
No,
Yes,
no.
yes. So, Joey, obviously retail media networks experienced just massive growth in 2020 on into 2021, and they're poised to become even more important. I mean, every week I see another retailer announcing that they've got a retail media platform. So how have you been observing this change recently, and where do you predict shift will be occurring in the near future?
Yeah, I think this might also be my favorite subject. I follow it really closely. And I think in many ways, the growth and proliferation of retail media is kind of, where Chicory is headed and where Chicory makes sense. As Yuni said, we've been running this business for 8 years, and in some ways waiting for this moment, waiting for digital influence in grocery to really, really matter. And so I think you need to take a step back and think about like, why is retail media taking off in the first place? And as Yuni was mentioning earlier, it's because of this massive consumer shift, not just to grocery e-commerce, but to them using, digital tools and digital content to influence their purchase before they even walk into a store, right? So like that's big shift number one. Number two is the addressability and attribution that retail media can provide, right? Like the measurement, which is a huge problem in general across a lot of industries, but particularly in CPG, right? Being able to properly measure the effectiveness of any form of advertising, but digital in particular, retail media obviously solves that problem. So I think that the second half, like where you go after you've kind of established that is like, okay, well, where are these dollars coming from? And Yuni kind of just mentioned this, but when we look at where those dollars are shifting, they're shifting from in-store and print, right? They're not necessarily shifting from other digital tactics. Not right now. There's kind of this massive move from in-store centric tactics to digital tactics. And so what that means is the KPIs that those dollars need to drive are more similar to, for example, the KPIs of an FSI or a coupon, which in many ways is essentially performance marketing, right? And they're not so much traditional, what I call traditional digital KPIs, something like viewability or CTR. And so once you've kind of established that, then I think you need to understand like, well, where are places that you can drive those same KPIs? Obviously, search is a huge one. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in is kind of what comes after search, right? Or how do different retail media platforms think about massively scaling search or other performance marketing channels? And everything around privacy and limitations around cookies and third-party cookies, that's accelerating kind of those questions as well. I'd say the other biggest thing, and there's been a lot of news about this recently that I'm really interested in, is maybe what I'd call the platformization of retail media. And so both the demand side and the supply side of that. So on the demand, you have companies like a Kenshu, and then on the supply side, you have a company like Citrus Ads. And I think, part of the reason that I think that's interesting is it's kind of easy to forget that, particularly in North America, in the United States, there are a lot of regional, small, and independent retailers out there. And the shift to digital is going to take, their shift to digital is definitely going to take advantage of retail media, the retail media network concept as well. And so I think like that's one of the biggest things that we haven't really seen. Everyone's of course talking about the big retailers and them establishing, retail media networks and the growth there. And that's obviously super, super important. It's super important to marketers. But again, just like with food content, there's this massive long tail, and what happens there? How does the ability to essentially buy retail media programmatically just dramatically shift like the measurability component across a lot more digital touch points? I think that's totally untapped and something that's going to be really big. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year.
Thank you so much, Joey, for that fascinating explanation and actually going one level down into metrics that matter when you started talking about search, etc., and why it's meaningful for what both of you do with Chicory as well. But, the utility infielder took away the thunder question of the day from the cleanup hitter. So now I got to play long reliever. And so I'll go to the section that's called privacy and cookies. And iOS 14 Uni. It's been out for 3 weeks. Obviously, Apple and Facebook have had this little partnership that's often been up, down, all over the place in terms of when will it be that Facebook's data collection via Apple will actually come to a grinding halt. And now I believe with iOS 14, consumers have to opt in versus opt out. And the percent of consumers opting in is minuscule based on the early few weeks read. So with this news about enabling more data privacy and eliminating third-party cookies, a lot of agencies and advertisers, marketers that I talk to are worried about being able to effectively reach their target shoppers. And Yuni, I'm going to bring it back to the word you started with, contextual shopping. How do you see this shift playing out, particularly contextual shopping via retail media networks?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because we've all seen this coming, GDPR, CCPA, Google killing the third-party cookie, and now Apple's ATT. And it's this long-coming, consumer trend of wanting more privacy. And it's particularly fascinating, like you mentioned, because of its lack of the number of people opting out, or not the number of people not opting in. I think I read a report that only 4% of people are opting in to keep being tracked. And that is crazy because if you think about the past decade with, the ad tech boom and just how programmatic advertising has been built, it's been all about tracking. It's been all about behavioral data. This is the backbone of advertising, programmatic advertising as we know it. And it's being shaken to its core. And it's interesting to look at kind of where this will go because, of course, there are going to be workarounds. There's going to be ways to do this just because it's such a large industry. But at the end of the day, if you play it out, if consumers are demanding this and this is the way the consumers are going, this is going to be an ongoing battle and it's just going to get harder and harder. When it comes to, from like a grocery perspective, I think it's especially tricky for CPGs who, compared to a D2C company or non-D2C CPGs that don't collect, call it first-party data, they're not selling their own stuff on their own website. This is really tricky and really scary potentially. Selfishly, when we think about this space, again, we do contextual advertising. I remember, I was talking about how we started this business by talking to Chobani. And when we got into the advertising game, we took a look around, and it was when ad tech was still very frothy, and a lot of companies were touting, call it machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms. There was all these black boxes of technology to do incrementally better targeting. And so when we built our media business, honestly, we said, let's get back to basics. Let's simplify this. If someone's looking at a recipe, hit them with, target that consumer. It's a very, very simple product. And, that simplicity sometimes has hurt us in the past, people asking us about our algorithms and stuff like that. But I think now it's all about simplicity, kind of back to basics today. So, self-servingly, when we talk to our clients, it's a lot about, hey, again, recipes in that shopping moment come together really, really nicely. And so, we'll start to see, hopefully, more shopping moments, more contextual moments, again, contextual commerce moments come up as these big changes happen in the industry, not just recipes.
For the record, I let Sri track me on my iPhone, so I'm okay with that. But in any event, Joey, we're coming to a real break in the pandemic. The CDC has changed its guidelines. We see the weather improving, restaurants are opening up outdoor dining, and the return to on-premise dining is accelerating. So given that, how is Chicory positioned to help CPG brands and grocery retailers through this transition that has definitely benefited them from the at-home consumption experience and now adjusting to the post-COVID pandemic consumption patterns?
Yeah. So, we're definitely seeing kind of changes that are going on right now, obviously. I think the most important thing to remember about what's happened over the last year or so is that people have acquired skill sets and they've formed new habits. And that's the way that I look at it. I'm someone that cooked before COVID, but I have tons of friends, particularly in New York City, where very few people cook, primarily because of the tiny kitchens. They've acquired all of these skills that they're not going to throw out the window, right? Absolutely, people are going to start eating out more, and that's going to change how much people cook. But I think that that's a really important lens. So actually, when you look at recipe content, when you look at grocery shopping as a whole, and grocery e-commerce adoption, things are starting to slow down a little bit and normalize a little bit. But when you look at recipe content, we're still seeing certain accelerations. For example, when we're able to look at our data, because we're able to look at kind of consumer trends across this network, both in terms of shopping and different content that's popping. We're actually seeing a lot of categories that are up, even over last year. Like, for example, grilling, I think, is up almost 20 to 30% year over year. And so, I think in some ways what you're seeing is that people are, like, to use grilling as an example, people are using those skill sets. They're actually digging deeper into food content and recipe content. If you look at a lot of growth numbers, not just of food publishers and a lot of the companies that we work with, but with other food influencers or food celebrities, their growth numbers are insane, even over the last few months. I mean, people are getting more into cooking than ever because of this skill set acquisition. So it's kind of almost this funky dynamic where, you have the slowdown in grocery e-commerce, you have the slowdown in certainly in potentially how much people are going to be buying when they go into a store, and average trips. But you're seeing a proliferation and growth still in recipe and food content. At least that's what we're seeing.
Thank you guys so much for giving us a scoop on Chicory and how it's connected to recipes, contextual advertising, contextual shopping. But wait, we're not done yet. Yuni, tell us about how it is every single day. Like, what is a day in the life of Yuni to lead and manage a tech startup that's so on the cutting edge of grocery?
Yeah, every day is different. Joey and I joke about this all the time. It's interesting, and it keeps you on your toes, right? A lot of people ask, like, what is it? What is the number one thing to think about when starting a business? Or, I now mentor a couple of newer, I guess, founders, and it comes down to the people. So as long as you take care of your people well. Business is made up of its people, and if you can give them the room and the flexibility and the trust to make sure that, to allow them to make the right decisions and them to experiment, that's when you have innovation and creativity and, all things pointing in the same direction. So, lots of easy days, lots of hard days, honestly. But at the end of the day, grocery does not innovate so quickly. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that, we built a company that has helped to push things forward a little bit. And again, I think I attribute that all to the people at the business.
So, Yuni, I think you said a very important thing out here that I want to call out for all executives in our audience listening to this podcast, and that is, I asked Yuni, tell us about leading and managing a tech startup, and he started the answer right at the center of it with people, and people as an asset and actually investing in people. Thank you, Yuni, for that.
Joey, let me finish this off with asking you about, in a similar vein, but about startups, particularly in the grocery space. Any advice to people doing this around avoiding some of the pitfalls or some of the challenges that you faced along the way so that they can accelerate their business?
I think it really depends. Grocery is huge, right? Are you starting a grocery marketing company? Or are you trying to get your product on shelves? Mm-hmm. It's, super interesting going to places like Expo East or Expo West, and you get to meet a variety of people, right? So I think what I've found, and this is true for many industries, of course, is it's all about the relationships. In this industry is very, very small. Particularly, with retailers and CPGs, they're just the biggest source of innovation and strategic advantage. And you just get so much because there are so many really, really bright, talented people that work at a lot of these large, legacy big businesses that want to innovate, that want to do more. And I think what we've been able to do is, work with a lot of folks like that. And they have more resources than we do, of course, right? Obviously. And they've been able to help us, achieve our goals. And so I think, in grocery, knowing who to partner with, finding advocates, at those businesses is super, super important, especially as you're trying to prove out your business model. You got to have those first early customers and you got to lean into them.
I want to summarize what we learned in this episode, Peter. The most important word of the day, contextual shopping. Retail media networks, our favorite topic, and how they come together. The rise of grocery at-home consumption in the last year, which obviously directly proportional to the growth of recipes. We also learned we have 2 budding a cappella singers, and we know Joey can cook. And I am calling my car at the garage in an hour and headed to crossing the Queensboro Bridge. I won't tell people where Joey lives, but I am crossing the Queensboro Bridge. And one other important thing that I think really stood out for me, in addition to what Chicory does in this space, congratulations to you both. 8 years of patience definitely pays up. This is your moment, folks, and sounds like you're right in the middle of seizing the moment. But I want to get back to a very important thing Yuni said, and I want to stress it one more time. Folks, people are your greatest assets. And when you invest in people, you cannot fail. And thank you for kind of coaching us on that, Yuni. For all audience, I want to remind you folks, of course, you can find all our content at cpgguys.com. Please do join this growing family on LinkedIn, growing 50 organic followers every single day by going to linkedin.com. Go to the search bar, type CPG Guys, and all you got to do is hit the plus button that also says follow next to it, and you can stay abreast with our content. You're welcome to leave us a rating or a review at ratethispodcast.com/CPG Guys. And from time to time, we put up polls. We're very thankful that you respond to them to shape the show. Yuni and Joey, thank you so much for joining the show today. Could one of you please tell us where we can learn more about Chicory? And if someone wants to get in touch with y'all, how they would do it?
Yeah, sure. You can learn more about Chicory at www.chicory.co. That's www.chicory.co.
So for our audience, that's chicory.co. You can also find that data in this podcast, contextual liner notes. So I use the word contextual, Peter. How about that? I'm really mastering that now. And you can find it in the liner notes. Please do look in. Yuni and Joey are both on LinkedIn. You can, of course, connect with them. And we're not done, folks, because we have a part 2 and part 3 of this partnership series that will appear in the next couple months, where we'll be diving into brands and their connection, in addition to talking to Chicory. Peter, a pleasure doing this week over week with you. What are your learnings today, Peter?
I'm thinking you and me can join them. We could do a barbershop quartet. No?
Hey.
Seriously, Sri, I love this because what they've done is they've made it easier for people to feed their family in the face of this pandemic, and people are developing skills as a result of that, and those are skills that will live long after this pandemic ends, and that's terrific. And they're making it easier to shop. They're making recipes shoppable. Terrific.
Thank you, folks, for listening in, and we will see you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.